Welcome to Nice and Blunt. This is part 2 of my start sit video. We're talking about all of the late Sunday games and those primetime games, Sunday night and Monday night in this video. So if you're wondering where they were, this is part 2. If you're looking for all of the earlier games, the link is in the description for part 1. But let us begin. We left off with the Cleveland Browns at the Las Vegas Raiders. When it comes to the Browns defense, oh boy, it's a tough matchup across the board. Ranks bottom 10 everywhere, and especially against quarterbacks, it is bottom 3. So no upgrade for Geno. Fuck that. Not going to start Geno Smith this week. I'm also not dying to trust Ashton Jeanty against the Browns. On the year, they're a bottom 3 matchup, but they have gotten a little less difficult lately, especially against Derrick Henry. There was some value. So in the last month, it actually ranks 19th, not 29th, and that is much more average than you would think. So maybe Jeanty does play well, but honestly, I don't trust this offense at all. He did nothing in the run game last week, and the offensive line is just so abysmal. So odds are he gives you really low yardage on the ground. I'm going to fade Ashton Jeanty. But then the wide receiver matchup against Cleveland is really tough. In the last month, it's down to the worst matchup in the NFL, 32nd overall. But weather has helped them. Their defense is good, but I'm not sure it's this good. It's just the fact that they face off against Las Vegas, why I wouldn't trust a receiver against them. The Las Vegas wide receiver core is trash. So no thank you against the Browns. Terrible matchup here. And even tight ends don't play too well against Cleveland. But the Raiders are a pretty good matchup for specifically wide receivers. And even quarterbacks play pretty well. Average matchup for QBs, but top 4 for wideouts. I would expect some upside in the passing game for the Browns. But running backs, not the best matchup here, so kind of neutral. I'll probably keep Judkins in the same territory as always. However, tight ends really struggle against the Raiders, so you might not trust the combo of Njoku or Fannin against Las Vegas. Last week, I faded Jake Ferguson. He only had 16 yards, but a touchdown did save him. You'll need a touchdown this week. I would not bet on it against Las Vegas. But Brock Bowers, obviously in your lineup, although the Browns are a bottom 10 matchup, who cares? Bowers is a lock in your lineup at all times, and there is no chance I am benching him. But the Browns defense going to go ham this week. Definitely some elite upside. There is always a chance that Bowers and Jeanty burn you, but I wouldn't bet on it. I would trust that the Cleveland defense really torches that abysmal Vegas offensive line. They can't stop anyone in the pass rush. They're going to dominate. So I like Myles Garrett to have at least 1 sack. I think there could be some interceptions here. The Browns defense should have a field day against Geno Smith. So got to start Cleveland's defense. However, Quinshon Judkins is a solid RB2. We're starting this week. The matchup isn't scary enough to fade, and the Raiders have given up touchdowns pretty consistently to running backs this year. They're getting a little better as of late, but still not a tough enough matchup where I'm scared. So Judkins always in the RB2 conversation. He's a bit matchup dependent, and I'm not going to guarantee you he puts up top 12 numbers this week, but I do think he'll be a top 20 play overall at the position. Jerry Jeudy, I think, has some interesting upside this week, though. The Raiders' secondary is really bad, giving up really good numbers for wide receivers. However, the quarterback change is hard to trust. Let's just mention it. My long shot for the Browns is Shedeur Sanders, because it looks like Dylan Gabriel is not going to play. Shedeur made his debut last week. He looked okay, nothing special. Did have an interception, but it was very limited action, not enough to fully gauge. So with a full week in practice as the starter, I do expect him to play better. The Raiders don't scare you. I actually see some upside for Shedeur Sanders. He wanted to be drafted by Las Vegas. He wasn't, and maybe this is a good revenge spot for him. So I think he'll be an interesting flyer in Superflex. And if he plays well, it wouldn't entirely shock me, especially given the Raiders matchup is good for wideouts. And I don't know exactly who his top target will be. But if you think about just what this team pays in terms of salaries, it should be Jerry Jeudy. He gets the highest contract that they have. So I think he'll be the top target, but I don't trust him. I think this is a major gamble, but obviously, I do think he's a bit more tempting than he is normally. So in the flex conversation, I think he's the more appealing pass catcher for the Browns this week. But in general, that's been Njoku and Fannin who have been more safe in your lineup. But I would fade them this week. I don't think they're safe starts because the Raiders are a very tough matchup. Bottom 5 numbers for tight end cores against Las Vegas. And if they have to split it, then very touchdown dependent this week. Just like Jake Ferguson, if you don't get a touchdown, you might get less than 20 yards. So good luck. It's a pick your poison. If I had to pick just one, I would settle on Njoku. I think Njoku has a little bit more experience and value. I could see Shedeur lean on the veteran a little bit more than the rookie. So I'd rather go Njoku, but I'll have them most likely back to back. The matchup, though, is so difficult. I think I'll bench both Browns tight ends in this game. Ashton Jeanty, I'm very scared to endorse, but odds are I'll keep him in the lineup given his volume. He'll still probably carry you to about 8 or so points, but without a touchdown, you might get totally burned. But the Browns are getting a little easier in the last month, up to bottom 15, not bottom 5 in terms of matchups. So a little easier, but still difficult. I still downgrade running backs significantly against the Browns, and I just don't trust his offensive line. He can give you an 11-yard rush and still end the game with less than 10 yards rushing overall. So that just sucks. That's so annoying. Very frustrating usage last week, at least in full PPR. He is catching passes, but it doesn't necessarily turn into yardage. You need a touchdown from Jeanty. Without it, I don't think he's a good play. He's just a flex option. This week, I'd rather go Judkins in the same game. But Trey Tucker, a little bit interesting. The Browns matchup, though, is the toughest for receivers in the last month, so I'm not going to endorse him. He's always in the flex territory because he is a starting number 1 wide receiver on the Raiders depth chart, but not a safe play whatsoever. I would fade him if I can. Gonna bench him, ideally, more likely than not. But Las Vegas is an interesting dark horse defense this week. They get Shedeur Sanders making his rookie debut. To pretend like there is no upside for a pick 6 would be a lie, but I don't trust Las Vegas on defense. They're playing at home. That does help them a little bit, but boy, I'd be very embarrassed if I was starting Las Vegas in my lineup. You can definitely get a more talented unit, even in a tougher matchup. They're probably a better start than Las Vegas. I think similar to like Chicago against Pittsburgh, Las Vegas against the Browns is going to be one of those ugly but tempting low-end starts at defense. So good luck if that's what you're going to rock with, but it does feel a little too obvious to work out. Shedeur might really help you. That is possible, but Jack Betch, not going to trust him. It looks like Tyler Lockett is more involved, and Lockett isn't even a safe play either, so not going to trust the rookie Jack Betch. Also, Dante Thornton, not going to trust him. Will have some upside if a deep shot finally hits, but he's not even getting the targets for that. I would not trust Dante Thornton. And Michael Mayer is getting on the field, but I only trust Brock Bowers. The Browns matchup's a bad one, so let's not get cute. Let's not start a backup second tight end in Vegas. But Jerome Ford, not getting enough volume to trust. It's the Quinshon Judkins show. So despite like 4, 5, maybe 6 touches for Ford, it's not valuable enough to trust. And Dylan Sampson does nothing unless Judkins goes down. So no value there. I'm also definitely not starting Dylan Gabriel. He's getting benched for Sanders this week, but I think he might get his job back if he's healthy enough and Sanders shits the bed. But Geno Smith, not going to start him. The Browns are a bottom 3 matchup, and Geno has very capped upside in general. Never a safe play. So all those guys I'm benching, but this player you should probably bench, but I will acknowledge I couldn't think of a Raiders long shot. It's probably Tyler Lockett, but I think Cedric Tillman actually carries more upside and is more appealing than Tyler Lockett, in my opinion, because Shedeur Sanders is not tied to anyone. You can't tell me that there is an allegiance to sending Judy targets. Even Njoku or Fannin aren't locks to get the volume. But the Raiders matchup is so good for wide receivers, I could see a touchdown available. And I don't think Tillman is that far behind Njoku, Judy, or Fannin on the depth chart. He's been banged up, so it's been hard to gauge, but he has scored touchdowns this year, and last year he played really well when he was healthy. So it is possible that he's the guy Shedeur looks to the most. I don't want to trust him, but I will acknowledge I have looked at picking up Tillman off the wire a couple times. I'm not ready to do it, but he is an interesting long shot candidate. If Shedeur favors him more than Judy, wouldn't shock me because I don't think anything is locked in the Browns target share. Good luck with Tillman, but odds are I'll leave him on the waiver wire. Feels a little too risky to endorse. So no thanks there, but there is some upside. That's it for this game. Let's move on to the next one, where in Arizona, the Cardinals are hosting Jacksonville, and the Jags defense is kind of all over the board. They're elite at stopping running backs, a bottom 3 matchup for the running back position. But if you look at quarterbacks, it's a top 4 matchup. They cannot stop anyone, except for last week against the Chargers. Last week was a major exception where these stats did lie. But going into that game, there were a lot of high-end outcomes for bad quarterbacks like Geno Smith. Davis Mills also dropped like 30 points on the Jaguars in fantasy. So last week was just a big shocker. The Chargers shit the bed. So I'm more willing to blame the Chargers rather than blame Jacksonville for waking up. There have been times where their defense plays well, but last week was a big shocker. Didn't see it coming. So that game had playoff implications. This game does not. And I could see the Jaguars not taking this opponent seriously and looking ahead to a lot of divisional matchups still on their schedule. So the Jaguars, I think, are going to not play as well as last week. And the only matchup you're afraid of is for the running back position. Otherwise, you're upgrading pretty much everyone facing the Jaguars. But Arizona has been a good matchup for running backs and tight ends this year. Otherwise, kind of difficult for quarterbacks and receivers. But in the last couple weeks, they've dealt with a lot of injuries on defense. So if the injuries continue to pile up, if those players don't come back, then I wouldn't fade anyone against Arizona. Their defense did not do anything against the Niners last week. So let's tell you who we're starting. We're obviously trusting Trey McBride. The volume will be even higher because Marvin Harrison Jr. is not going to play. He's already ruled out with his appendix surgery for this game as well, and that was expected. It'd be kind of a shock that he only misses 1 game after undergoing surgery. So Harrison not going to play. The volume is about 10 targets for him, so that goes elsewhere. I would assume at least like 3 or 4 of them go to Trey McBride. So McBride always getting 10 plus targets and has been scoring touchdowns every week now with Brissett. So a lock in the lineup. He is the tight end 1 in fantasy this year. But last week, Michael Wilson exploded with an elite performance. Brissett kind of shocked us, but Michael Wilson finally lived up to the hype. Back when he was a rookie, I actually liked him quite a bit, but he never played well with Kyler. He's playing great now that Brissett has taken over, and with no Harrison this week again, I think he's a must start. I'll probably rank him top 20 at the position. After last week with Brissett's volume in the passing game, I think a no-brainer, a lock in the lineup, most likely. And Brissett, I think, is kind of interesting. If you just picked him up off the wire, this matchup is top 4 on the season, and if you throw out the Justin Herbert game last week, they would be the best matchup by far in recent history. So Jacoby Brissett just set some records with over 450 passing yards. If you have him, don't pretend like he isn't valuable. We thought it was just matchups why he was playing good, like that Cowboys game was impressive, but this matchup is also good, and maybe you want to endorse Brissett with confidence, but maybe he's more of a flex play. I think he has earned start consideration, though. I think he'll be a ideal streaming candidate this week if you're trying to replace someone like Justin Herbert or potentially Bo Nix. Brissett, I think he's top 12, in my opinion, but haven't done my official ranks yet. Maybe I'll have him a bit lower, given there's a lot of other good names you could trust. But ETN gets a very good matchup here, top 10 against Arizona, so no reason to fade him. Defensive line is getting a bit healthier lately. They got some additions with their rookies getting healthy, but ETN, I still trust in terms of volume. It is pretty locked up, but touchdowns sometimes evade him. I would expect a touchdown, though, against Arizona. I think it's more likely a shootout than a low-scoring game, but Brian Thomas Jr., all a matter of health. If he returns to the lineup, I don't fear the secondary if Will Johnson misses again, who I don't expect to play. The rookie has been injured like all year, and then Brian Thomas Jr. just needs to get healthy, dealing with a high ankle sprain. I could see him miss yet again, but he was limited last week in practice. He was limited today on Wednesday. Odds are he returns, and if you have him, odds are you'll start him. So monitor his health, but I think he'll play. And another player to monitor is Trey Benson, but Benson practiced on Wednesday. I think he'll come back to the lineup. They have designated him to return from IR. So we'll know for sure later in the week if he gets activated. They have opened his window to practice. So that's a great sign. I assume he'll be fully active by Sunday. You'll know for sure on Saturday. They have to activate him off of IR in order for him to play. So right now he's still on IR, but he can practice. And I think based on how cautious they've been with him, they gave him a few extra weeks. I think he'll be active in this game. I think he will play. And the Jags matchup is bad, but the volume I think will be there, especially in the passing game. I could see him get like 5 targets with no Marvin Harrison. So I like his upside, but the floor I think is not there this week. It's all going to come down to touchdowns. If this game is a shootout, Benson will be a great start. If this game is a low scoring one, then he won't find the end zone. He will let you down. But I think he's a good flex play. Odds are I'll start him. I think I'll rank him around RB25, but maybe closer to 30 given the matchup. Jacoby Myers, an interesting flex play, especially if Brian Thomas Jr. does not suit up again. And last week, it looked like he did overtake Parker Washington in the offense. And Washington's a fun story, but Myers is definitely better, definitely gets paid a lot more. And given they traded for him, they're definitely trying to use him. That's for sure. So maybe he has a long-term future if they re-sign him. But at the moment with Hunter out and Thomas not 100%, I do see around 7 targets going his way in this game. So I think he's fine, not terrible, but need a touchdown for the upside. Probably gets you at least like 50 yards though, if he does catch at least 5 passes. But Trevor Lawrence, not a good matchup against Arizona, a bit tricky this year. So I never really endorse him. I don't think he's like a safe start ever. And if he doesn't contribute with rushing yards and rushing touchdowns, his upside's pretty capped. So just a flex play, not the scariest matchup. There is shootout potential though. If you tell me Brissett goes off again, I could see Lawrence try to keep up. So some upside, but low floor, probably going to pass. I'd much rather go Jacoby Brissett off the waiver wire. But Parker Washington, I would bench him. Last week was a reminder he's still not quite that talented. And without a special teams touchdown, you need volume. I think it's going to go away, especially if Thomas does come back to the lineup. So going to bench him. Feels too risky to trust. But Brenton Strange almost came off IR last week, but then suffered a setback. I assume he's still on IR, but there's a chance he gets activated. If he does, I might be tempted to plug him in, but I think I want to wait and see. He is not 100% healthy. The setback is a red flag, so might not play. Even if he does, I think I'll bench him despite the matchup ranking top 10. I don't trust him in his first game back from IR. And then Tim Patrick did contribute last week, but feels way too random to bet on him. I will keep him on the waiver wire. No thank you with Tim Patrick. But Bam Knight would be more tempting if you tell me Benson is not actually ready to go. Last week we thought DeMercado was the guy, but DeMercado is out, not going to play here. So it will be a backfield between Bam Knight and Michael Carter if Benson can't go. But I expect Benson to be active, so that's why I'm just going to be benching Bam Knight outright. If you tell me Benson is not ready, then I'd rather go Bam Knight, but it'll be split between him and Michael Carter. It's not a lock either way, and he's actually questionable at the moment. He's not a lock to play either. I don't think it's safe, especially given the matchup against Jacksonville does rank bottom 3. So only volume can save you. If that's the case, only give me Benson. I will bench Bam Knight. But both defenses, I think, will be traps in this one. I think it's more likely a shootout than a low-scoring game. We've seen the Jags really not show up on defense at times. Last week, I think, was fool's gold. So on the road, I don't expect the same type of performance from them. I don't trust them. Against Brissett, I will fade them. Even without Harrison, I still think the Cardinals can play pretty well. So not going to trust Jacksonville, but they are kind of tempting because Harrison won't be active. But with the Arizona defense, they're a little interesting as well, but their injuries have led to a lot of low outcomes. I'm not dying to trust them. The floor, I think, is non-existent, but there is a tempting ceiling. I think I'll pass, though. I think there's better options. I'll avoid them, given how banged up they are. Their depth chart is pretty depleted, but Emari DeMercado, also an offense, not going to play. He's out for this one, so Trey Benson, I think, is the only guy worth considering. And then Marvin Harrison Jr., I did mention, is not going to play with appendicitis. So that means Greg Dortch will have value yet again. Dortch played pretty well, did have a touchdown for the second week in a row, and about 60 yards, but I don't expect Brissett to throw for over 400 every week. So not enough volume to really go around and keep him viable. It's really consolidated with McBride and Michael Wilson, but he is the next target next man up, and he will contribute a little bit. So if you don't care about this matchup, it is average. Maybe Brissett just played so well, you will consider Dortch, but it feels so desperate. I think you'll probably find a better flex option than Greg Dortch, but could have value. Don't dismiss him. He did play well last week. It was a good matchup, though, even better against the Niners. But Baishal Tutin is my long shot for the Jacksonville Jaguars. The matchup is top 8 for running backs, and he does often vulture ETN. Sometimes ETN just doesn't punch it in on the goal line. Not as effective lately. So Tutin gets a minor element of surprise. I don't think he's better than ETN. I just think when he's on the field, they don't stack the box as much. Not expecting the ball to go to him as likely as it would to ETN. So that, I think, is the reason why he's a bit more effective on the goal line. But without a touchdown, you will get screwed. Not going to start him. If I can avoid it, I will. So those are my start sits for Jacksonville at Arizona. No weather to speak of. This game is in a dome. So that's it for this game. Let's move on to the next one. Not too many left. We have the Eagles at Dallas, and I pretty much want to start everyone in both offenses because they're really obvious. You kind of know exactly where the ball's going to go. They have very top-heavy rosters, not much depth beyond those studs. So let's just look at the matchup stats real quick. When it comes to the Philadelphia Eagles, they are a very tough matchup for tight ends. So last week was difficult. Also a bottom 5 matchup for Ferguson, and he had less than 20 yards. Only a touchdown did save you. So the Eagles don't give up touchdowns like the Raiders, even less on the year. So I would fade Ferguson a bit. Based on name value, his floor is still kind of high, but you could get burned with the same amount of yards as last week. He had 4 receptions, 16 yards, and a touchdown against a matchup that ranked 29th at stopping tight ends. The Eagles will probably stop him pretty well. But since the trade deadline, the Eagles defense is getting much more difficult. It ranks average against quarterbacks, so I'm not going to fade Dak too much. But against running backs, it used to be a top 10 matchup. Now it ranks number 11. However, in the last month, it ranks number 20. Since the trade deadline, as their defense has gotten healthier with some trade acquisitions, I don't think you can run on them pretty easily. They really shut down the Lions last week, along with Green Bay the week before that. So not expecting the world from Javonte Williams, but on paper, it's not the toughest matchup. He did have 2 touchdowns against them back in week 1, but the wide receiver matchup is not that tricky, ranks 20th as well. So a slight downgrade in the back of my mind, but not enough to fully fade against the Eagles secondary. But Dallas's defense is a bit misleading. They're starting to get a lot more difficult. It definitely got a lot of additions that help them play much better. I do fear them a little more than I did back in September, but still a good matchup even for receivers. While it is getting tougher, it doesn't rank first anymore. In the last month, it's down to 9, but on the year, they were so bad to start the season, it still ranks as the best matchup in 2025. So receivers, I would still trust against Dallas, but in division, things can get strange. Only tight end is the one that stayed neutral all throughout the year. Last 4 weeks, it's still an average matchup. So when it comes to players I'm starting, I will keep Dak in the lineup. Had 4 touchdowns last week against the Eagles. Easily could be a shootout, and I will keep him in the lineup. It feels too crazy to bench Dak coming off last week. So gonna start him. But in week 1 against Philly, he did not have any touchdowns. He got vultured by Javonte twice. So that's kind of the only way it doesn't work out. It could happen, but I doubt it will happen again. Otherwise, Jalen Hurts is always in the lineup, but this offense has looked gross last couple weeks, so I could understand fading him. Honestly, I want to rank him much lower than top 5 this week, but his rushing stats usually cover you, and odds are you'll still get a tush-push touchdown. I think this game is more likely a shootout than a defensive battle. So Jalen Hurts still going to be in my lineup, and if I have Cowboys receivers, I'm definitely starting them. CeeDee Lamb, a no-brainer, a top 3 wide receiver, but George Pickens played even better than him last week, definitely top 15 at the position. Kind of feeling like he's top 10 right now. I can't think of a reason to bench him, but he is behind Lamb. Let's not pretend like he's more valuable, but not that far behind. That is not that different, straight up against Lamb. But Javonte needs some touchdowns this week. The Eagles are looking more difficult lately, but did score 2 touchdowns back in week 1, so has proven he can definitely put up good numbers against the Eagles. However, the pass catchers, I think, get a good matchup here. Their secondary is not getting healthy enough to fix the problems, and they're also not trading for anyone in that department. So Devontae Smith, I think, will play very well. Even though last week was bad for both receivers, Devontae played like shit. I still kind of trust him a bit more than A.J. Brown. Not by far, but I do think I'll be ranking Devontae one spot higher than A.J. Brown this week. Back-to-back, most likely. The Cowboys matchup is a good one. So upgrade both. I'll start both Brown and Smith. However, Saquon, I'm a bit worried about Saquon, I think, is really touchdown dependent this week. And if he doesn't get it, I could see him actually get stopped by the Cowboys defense. They looked good last week. Let's not pretend like they didn't. Ashton Genty had like negative yards almost. Genty was abysmal, less than 10 on the ground. So Barkley pretty touchdown dependent on the year and has been pretty ineffective. Given what's at stake, the Cowboys season is on the line. They have a record where they kind of have to win out in order to have any shot. I could see their defense really step up. They know this team very well. They play well in division, and especially at home, they are usually a better team. So Saquon will stay in the lineup, but honestly, I will be ranking him lower than top 10. I have not seen enough from Barkley this year to know exactly what I'm going to get. So disappointed for sure, but not enough to bench. Still going to start him, but not going to rank him as a top 5 play anymore. Dallas Goedert, I think you're still going to start. Odds are you don't have enough tight end depth to bench him, but the main reason he's here is because I don't have the space in the start territory. So very high end flex play, probably a locked in starter at tight end. That position was really banged up last week, and I don't think everyone is coming back in week 12. So Goddard probably still inside my top 12 at the worst, but has been really up and down, kind of hard to predict week in, week out. High boom, high bust variance at a Goddard. But Jake Ferguson, I'm probably still going to start expecting a similar stat line as last week. But if it wasn't for his in-division historical stats against the Eagles, I would fade him for sure. The matchup scares me a lot. I want to bench him outright, but he actually really steps up against Philly in his career. Some of his best games ever have come against the Eagles. So still in the flex conversation, both of them are. They'll both probably be top 12 at tight end, but Ferguson I am downgrading significantly, and then Goddard is just a bit risky. Every time I do endorse him with confidence, he kind of lets me down, and then whenever I ignore him, he shocks me with a good game. So really hard to trust both of them, but this week I think they're probably still in your lineup based on the production they've had this year. But players I'm benching are the ancillary pieces that have no value in Dallas and Philly. Ryan Flournoy caught a touchdown last week, but never going to start him. Don't trust him. Jalen Tolbert is behind Flournoy, so no fucking chance. And then Turpin does have speed, could have like a special teams touchdown, but not going to trust him. No fucking chance against the Eagles. And then Tank Bigsby is getting some usage, but behind Saquon, no chance I'm going to bet on him. He would be the preferred handcuff, though, if I was going to handcuff Saquon on my bench. And then Shipley behind him, even less valuable. Same with A.J. Dillon, no value whatsoever. And then Jahan Dotson not getting enough routes or targets to start. Cannot trust Jahan Dotson. Same with Jaden Blue, sometimes active as Miles Sanders is on IR, but never getting more than like 6 touches in a game. I wouldn't start Jaden Blue, but call me crazy. I think both defenses are interesting long shots. There is more likely going to be a lot of points in this game. I'm probably going to bench both defenses, but they are looking better as of late, especially the Eagles. They've looked elite the last 2 weeks. And if it wasn't for the respect I'm giving the Cowboys offense, I would tell you they're a must start. They're a really valuable defense rest of season. And then they just shut down the Lions. If they can shut down Detroit, they can shut down anyone. So they're my long shot candidate. It feels strange to bet on them, but this game is in division. Weird shit happens, and there is some upside. There is some value. Let's not pretend like they're not playing really well. If you watch them, they look awesome. So Eagles, interesting long shot, and same with Dallas. It's not like the Eagles offense looks good. They won the last 2 games with less than 20 points both times. So if you tell me this game is like 40-37, not going to be surprised. If you tell me this game is 20-17, also not going to be surprised. In that scenario, then the defenses are more interesting. In division, anything can happen. I'm not telling you to start them, but I do think they have value and they do have some upside if things go right. Touchdowns will be critical, though. If you don't get a defensive score, I think you'll get burned. So maybe turnovers carry you enough, but I think even with a couple of them, the point total will crater you enough yards to maybe offer a negative with at least the Cowboys and maybe even the Eagles as well. But there is high upside. There's a lot of variance projecting these defenses this week. So good luck there. Odds are I will bench both of them. But let's move on. There's not that many games left. We have the Falcons at New Orleans. And big story in this game is that Michael Penix is out, going on IR. So Kirk Cousins will get the start for a while. I'm not starting Kirk Cousins, though, especially because Drake London is also inactive. So no passing upside whatsoever. Maybe you don't fear the Saints defense, but despite ranking neutral in every category, it's actually a bit misleading. In the last month, the quarterback matchup is down to bottom 3. The Saints defense is really stepping up, so quarterbacks don't play well against New Orleans. And then on the year, they're still top 15 against running backs, so average matchup there. But against wide receivers, they're getting a bit more difficult, ranks number 24 in the last month. So if they're holding down quarterbacks, they're also limiting the pass catchers, and I could see the receiver in Atlanta not do anything against New Orleans. But I don't really know what to believe with the Falcons defense. They started off the year pretty tough, and then in the last month, it seems like they've checked out. They've become one of the best overall matchups you can find after starting off as one of the toughest. On the year, they rank 18th against quarterbacks, but last 4 games, they rank top 4. They ranked top 4 against running back position on the season. They gave up 50 points to Jonathan Taylor. And then against wide receivers in the last month, they also rank top 4. Against tight ends, they're up to number 20, so still a tough matchup. But overall, it feels like they've quit. They know they're not making the playoffs. Their record is terrible, and their defense has rolled over. So injuries have played a factor, but really I think it's just coaching and the lack of wins on the record. So let's talk about the players you're starting, especially with no Drake London. Bijan is a lock. I would expect maybe 10 targets for him in the passing game, so going to contribute heavy. I would expect maybe 40 touches combined between him and Algier. At least 25 will go to Bijan in this game. So got to start him. That's obvious, but the Saints defense, I think, is a very solid start this week. The Kirk Cousins experience with no Drake London, going to be dog shit. Other than Bijan, I don't fear anyone in that offense. So Bijan can still have like 200 yards, and the Saints can still be a top 10 play. I like New Orleans on defense this week, but Olave, I think, gets a very good matchup here. The Falcons are giving up, like I mentioned, top 4 points allowed in the last 4 games. So Olave under Shuck is really safe. The volume's on lock, and he is starting to score some touchdowns now. There is value and upside with Olave. So definitely start him. Love the matchup. And Juwan Johnson is also really stepping up. On the year, the Falcons are tough, but lately they're not as difficult. So Juwan Johnson might get another 9-10 targets this week. He is clearly the go-to option after trading away Rashid Shaheed. So I like Juwan as a top 10 value in PPR. His floor is double digits. So like Juwan, the volume will carry you. But honestly, I don't fear these offensive playmakers enough. I still think the Falcons defense could be solid in fantasy against New Orleans in division. That's kind of all I need to know. The Saints, I think, will win this game, but not by landslide. They're not going to drop 30 points. And the Falcons defense, with their back against the wall, with no London or Penix, has to wake up, has to step up in division. I think they will. And I think they limit New Orleans just enough where they're a good play, but not safe. Last week, I thought they were good, and they did burn me. I could be wrong on Atlanta. Let's not pretend like they're the safest bet, but I do think they're worth a start, top 12 this week. But Alvin Kamara gets a great matchup against Atlanta coming off a bye. He should be fully rested and good to go. He also played well in division against the Panthers last time we saw him. So in this matchup, I think he could get up for this game. I do think he wants to beat a division opponent and get one last win against the Falcons. I think he probably retires. If not, it's probably his last year in New Orleans. So good luck with Kamara, an interesting flex play because the matchup is a big upgrade. But in terms of upgrades, I expect Tyler Algier to get a lot of volume. I think between him and Bijan, 40 touches combined, and 25 probably go to Bijan, but 15 would still go to Algier in that equation. So Algier has been very consistent at times, definitely contributing a lot. And in the run game, he will probably get some looks on the goal line. I wouldn't be shocked at all if Algier scores another touchdown. So solid flex play, not a good one, but a decent floor. This week, the volume should be over 10 touches. But if you're looking for a flyer at receiver, let's go Darnell Mooney, because obviously the volume will increase. He's not catching passes, though. He's played terrible football this year, and although he gets Cousins and maybe better chemistry than the chemistry with Penix, I just don't trust him. Last time we thought he was a good play when London sat, he burned me so bad. That rug pull, I don't forget. So Mooney, I've lost all faith in. I understand he's in the flex conversation. Got to put him in this section here, but honestly, don't want to endorse him at all. Last time, it was so bad. But volume could be there. I understand if he gets like 8 targets. Even more, wouldn't shock me. But Kyle Pitts also going to get extra volume with no London. Other players have to step up, and Pitts will probably get like 7 targets himself, but probably only gives you like 40 yards maximum. I do not trust Pitts for a touchdown with Cousins. Let's fade him. No thank you on Kyle Pitts. But interesting matchup here for Tyler Shuck. The Falcons in the last month rank as a top 4 matchup for the quarterback position. They are really giving up on defense. So Shuck played okay last time we saw him off the bye. A rookie usually gets better. So I think his upside is interesting. I don't know if the floor is safe. You probably just want to fade him. But if you tell me he offers a couple touchdowns this week, I wouldn't be shocked. The Falcons are a good matchup, and there is value. I don't think he burns you with less than 10 points, but I could see him just cap out at like 13 as well. So odds are I'll leave him alone, but the matchup indicates someone deserves an upgrade against the Falcons. He is one of those guys, and maybe off the wire, you're desperate enough to replace Justin Herbert. But odds are he'll barely crack my top 20. I think I'll still fade him. But in Superflex, he is pretty interesting. Not going to lie. The matchup is juicy. Devon Vele, I think, will start to contribute a little bit. They traded for him, but hasn't done anything yet. They need somebody else behind Chris Olave and Juwan. So I'm not going to start him. Not going to expect more than 4 targets, but I think his role could expand after the bye. I assume they don't want to waste a draft pick that they traded for. But Brandon Cooks, I don't trust either. Also going to get like 3 targets, but pretty meaningless. And then Devin Neal, the backup for Kamara, but pretty useless value in fantasy this year, so no thank you there. And then I mentioned it, I'm not starting Kirk Cousins, not going to bet against New Orleans. It's been a bottom 5 matchup in the last month, down to number 30 against the Saints. So no thank you there, especially with no Drake London. That's not good, and Penix is out, so maybe Cousins plays well against Tampa in a few weeks, but against New Orleans, let's wait and see. He played like shit against Miami. But my long shot is Kaderil Hodge. Not expecting anything, but he will have to step up behind Drake London. So I think he'll get the most snaps, but it means nothing. It means nothing in Atlanta. Taysom Hill will forever be my long shot in New Orleans. We all know it probably never turns into anything, but at some point there will be a touchdown waiting for him. You know, at some point he'll get some looks. So off the bye, maybe it happens, but I've been waiting for it. It is yet to happen. I am not going to endorse it. That's for sure. So that's it for this game. That is the Saints-Falcons start-sit decision. So let's move on to, on Sunday night, we have Tampa Bay at the Rams. And this game is probably a big shootout. The Buccaneers defense is a bad one this year. And last week, the stats against Josh Allen probably skew the numbers a little bit. They were starting to limit quarterbacks well before Josh Allen had 50 points. So I don't know if this is as good of a matchup as it would indicate, but on paper, you want to upgrade Stafford. You also want to upgrade Kyren Williams. The Bucs cannot stop the run this year, especially running backs who catch passes. Those are the ones that exploit them the most. But wide receivers also playing well. Top 12 matchup here, but Khalil Shakir couldn't exploit it last week. And then lastly, they are somewhat decent at stopping tight ends. That ranks bottom 10 in that category. But the Rams defense is pretty good, especially against running backs. They are bottom 5 this season. And for a while, they were the toughest, but now they're starting to give up some touchdowns. And perhaps it is a bit easier in fantasy against LA. But still a big downgrade for Bucky Irving if he gets the start. If not, Rashad White maybe gets vultured by Sean Tucker again. However, quarterbacks getting a bottom 10 matchup against the Rams. We just saw Sam Darnold throw 4 interceptions and no touchdowns. So that definitely factors in, but I still think Baker will probably put up good numbers. And then against wide receivers, they rank top 16 on the year, but actually top 10 in the last month. There is some upside for guys like Igbukah and Tez Johnson. Maybe Godwin returns as well. But Cade Otton had a bad matchup last week. This week it's pretty solid. So Cade Otton should contribute at tight end. But players I'm starting, obviously Puka Nacua, always in my lineup. That's a no-brainer. And despite Devontae Adams not playing very well last week, he had 8 targets, only 1 reception, still found the end zone and still is going to give you a touchdown every week like clockwork. So got to keep starting Adams. I don't want to bench him. Both Adams and Igbukah are on my subscriber league team, and they're both top 10 receivers. I would never bench them. That would be insane in my book. So this game is likely a shootout. Igbukah, a lock in the lineup. So is Adams. So is Puka. And because all 3 of them probably score a touchdown, we're starting both quarterbacks in this matchup. Stafford playing like an MVP, a lock in the lineup, a no-brainer. Gotta start him. And then Baker Mayfield, despite the more difficult matchup, I still want in the lineup. He played elite at SoFi last year, and in primetime, I expect him to play lights out again. He probably gets Godwin back this week. That might help. Otton should play better. Igbukah hopefully plays better. And then I also expect Bucky Irving back in the lineup. He is ramping up his practice reps. He's back at practice this week, and I assume they were saving him a little bit for this game. They needed him last week, but Sean Tucker played well. Bucky Irving, I think, will be back in the Rams game. So I would start him. The Rams are a bad matchup, but I would trust the volume and a touchdown. Bucky is so talented. If he's healthy enough to play, I got to start him. So maybe not top 10, but still top 15 at the worst. Got to lock him in to the lineup. Kyren Williams, though, gets a big upgrade. I think in terms of receptions, he could really contribute, but a touchdown I think is guaranteed. Against the Bucs, they can't stop running backs in fantasy this year. So all of these players are in my lineup. Definitely the studs in this game should be started. But Cade Otton, not great last week, but should play much better. The Rams are a solid matchup, and he has really stepped up at times. Even if Godwin comes back, Godwin's not fully healthy. Godwin is not overtaking Otton's targets entirely. So Otton, I still think, is a solid flex option at tight end. Gonna crack my top 15 at the worst. Might even crack my top 12. Let's see how the rankings go, but I view him similarly to Ferguson and Goddard this week at tight end. But Rachaad White, still kind of tempting. I don't know if Bucky's 100%. And right now, I don't know if he's even going to play. So if Bucky doesn't suit up, then Rachaad will be a solid flex option. I still think he'll get more volume than Sean Tucker. However, Tucker was way more explosive last week. So Rachaad, not a good matchup here. I would not really bet on him for elite upside. I'd rather go Bucky for sure. But in the flex conversation, Rachaad would still rank top 25 if he's the starter. If Bucky is available, though, I'm definitely benching Rachaad White. The matchup's bad against the Rams. But Sean Tucker, as the backup, gotta bench him. If Bucky comes back, no fucking chance I'd consider him. And then Godwin is practicing, but not going to be 100%. They're ramping him up for the playoffs. Even if he plays, I wouldn't expect more than like 3 or 4 receptions from Godwin. You'll need a touchdown, probably. Don't get it. But Sterling Shepard, not going to have any value if Godwin returns, so definitely benching him. Blake Corum gets a solid matchup, but behind Kyren Williams, just vulture upside, so no thanks there. Colby Parkinson might be a bit more interesting, though, at tight end, because they put Tyler Higbee on IR. Higbee got hurt, so a very crowded tight end room gets a little bit less crowded, and they might still run 3 tight end sets, even without Higbee. So Parkinson scored a touchdown last week. It's possible it happens again, but I really don't trust any tight end in LA, despite them wanting to get them involved. But this game, I think, is a big shootout, so I'm going to bench both defenses. The Rams are very tempting. The Rams have a good unit. The Rams could play well, especially at home. I could see them step up. But against the Bucs offense, I'm going to pass. The Bucs defense definitely going to give up a shit ton of points. So they are looking really bad, really vulnerable lately. I do not trust them. Neither defense I would start this week. I'm benching both the Rams and Buccaneers. I'm expecting 30-plus points from both teams on offense. The defense is not going to contribute enough, but I do think Tez Johnson still has some upside. I like the shootout potential, and he has the speed that Godwin, I think, is missing at this stage of his recovery. So Tez, I think, will still be on the field and still be the deep threat in this offense that could turn into high upside, but without a long touchdown, you'll get almost nothing. So going to bench him if I can. Only in DFS would I consider it, but Terrence Ferguson is my long shot for the Rams. And especially with Higbee going on IR, I could see this second round pick start to blossom in the back half of the year. I think they want to get him involved. He's just a bit too young to be on the field all the time, and he is their future at this position. But they're using not just Parkinson, but also Davis Allen. There is upside. The Rams are using tight ends, and Adams is a bit banged up right now. Ferguson has upside. He gets targeted down the field. I would expect at least 3 or 4 targets in this game to go to Ferguson. So hopefully you get a touchdown, but without it, I don't think it's worth it. Let's pass on Terrence Ferguson. And those are my start sits for this game. I'm trying to start all the studs. And then if you have Otten, I'd flex him. Rashad, I'd probably bench if Bucky is back. But last game of the week, let's move on to the final matchup. On Monday night, we have Carolina at the Niners in San Francisco. So the defense for the Niners is very depleted. However, they are starting to step up. Robert Saleh is coordinating the hell out of this unit. So the Niners are a very good matchup for quarterbacks and wide receivers right now. It ranks top 8 on the year, actually top 2 in the last month. But obviously the Jacoby Brissett game does skew those numbers. They won comfortably. There was only garbage time in that game. I don't know if I fully believe the Niners are the second best matchup for opposing quarterbacks. So maybe you want to upgrade Bryce Young, but I don't really trust him. Last week I think was an outlier, hard to repeat. However, against running backs, they were getting good in terms of matchups, and then last couple games they've gotten tougher. They are clamping down against the run, but tight ends play well against the Niners. On top of that, top 7 matchup this year, but they have played 2 games against Trey McBride, and he has scored a touchdown in both of them. So I don't know if it's more that they're bad or it's just who they've faced. The Niners, I think, could still limit their opponent on defense, but odds are this game is more likely a shootout. But the Panthers on occasion step up on defense. They are good at stopping wide receivers. On the year, it's a bottom 4 matchup, but in the last month does rank number 19 overall. So a little easier, especially against running backs. It's also getting much easier. The asterisk is significant there. On the year, the Panthers are 14th, but in the last month, they rank 3rd best matchup, giving up a shit ton of fantasy points at running back. So McCaffrey, a no-brainer. The Panthers are okay at stopping quarterbacks, though, but the Niners' offense is a juggernaut. I don't think it applies in this game. So against tight ends, they're getting a bit better, but against Kittle, who cares? I don't see much defense in this matchup. If there is, I think it's more likely on the Niners side than Carolina. So let's 100% start Christian McCaffrey. That's a no-brainer. He's always in your lineup. This is also a revenge game, and Carolina allowing top 3 numbers to running backs lately. So McCaffrey will be my running back 1 in the ranks this week. The matchup's tougher for Taylor. I think McCaffrey will outperform Jonathan Taylor. But Kittle has been lights out last couple games with Purdy back. He scored 2 touchdowns, so that connection isn't going anywhere. The upside is one of the highest you can find with George Kittle. I still prefer McBride, but you can argue that Kittle is better than Bowers right now. Ted McMillan had an insane game last week that no one really expected, so maybe it was on your bench, but after that production, you have to start him. The Niners are the second best matchup last month, and Michael Wilson just went off. The only player with a higher outcome than Ted McMillan in some formats. So go ahead and start Ted. Gotta put him in the lineup after last week. No brainer. Rico Dowdle should also be in the lineup. I could see him play very well. But if there's one position the Niners can stop a little better than the others, it is running backs. But Dowdle, I think, has earned your trust. Got to start him. The volume is going to be there, and his upside is way too high. And then Brock Purdy played really well in his return. I would also start him despite a minor downgrade against the Panthers. I like this offense. I trust the touchdown production, and as long as McCaffrey doesn't vulture you like 3 times on the goal line, then Purdy will probably get 3 touchdowns minimum himself. So one's going to go to Kittle, one probably goes to McCaffrey in the passing game, and then a third probably goes elsewhere, if not to one of those players a second time. So I like Purdy. Last week was very encouraging. The matchup isn't scary enough this week. In primetime, I trust the Niners offense a lot. But Juwan Jennings, not a good matchup for him, so I'd fade him a little bit, but he was much more involved than Ricky Pearsall last week. Pearsall only had 1 reception for 0 yards, so I was dead wrong. I apologize on endorsing Pearsall. A little too optimistic. Now that he returned, I thought he was healthy, but that was a smokescreen. As always, the Niners cannot trust their injury reports. So Pearsall did burn me last week. I started him. I got burned and I lost by, I believe, 12 points in a PPR league because of him. So that fucking sucked. But Juwan Jennings is my preferred option. I think they're both solid flex plays, but Pearsall definitely on the lower end of the top 40. Leggett also played fantastic last week, so you might trust him. But really, it's a question of, do you trust Bryce Young? Because Bryce Young gets a good matchup. If he plays as good as last week, he might look similar to Jacoby Brissett, who also torched the Niners last week. You're hoping for garbage time, but this is the only primetime game of the year for Carolina. I could see the Panthers really step up on defense and offense just because it's for the national audience. So they are tired of being slept on. They've played pretty well. They're an underrated team, and Bryce Young has had some good fantasy outcomes at times. Last week was one of them. So I like this matchup. That's mainly the only reason why I would flex him, but I doubt I'm ranking him top 15, mainly like number 18 or 17. He gets an upgrade, but I would like to see it again with Bryce Young before I tell you to start him. And odds are it doesn't happen. Odds are I'm never ranking Bryce Young high enough to capitalize on those outlier high upside games. But in best ball, I'm happy I drafted Bryce Young a decent amount last week. Was fucking awesome. But that maybe opens the door for Jalen Coker. The matchup against the Niners is pretty good. But if I'm going to bet on someone other than Tet, give me Leggett, not Jalen Coker. Leggett is definitely more tempting for upside and touchdown production. But Coker could have a breakout. I feel like his usage will inevitably go up, but it's hard to bet on in that offense. There's not much upside in general. But Chuba Hubbard has clearly lost his job, so the Niners matchup isn't good enough to merit starting two running backs here. So no thanks on Chuba Hubbard. I'll only go Rico Dowdle. And then Ayuk has not yet returned to practice. I don't expect him back until after the bye in week 14. So can't start him. Maybe you're still waiting on him on your IR. That's plugging it up. I would probably just drop him, but if you waited this long, I guess maybe keep waiting. Kyle Juszczyk, not going to start him. Might catch a touchdown, but not going to contribute with more than like 4 touches, so no thanks there. And then now that Pearsall's back, no thanks with Kendrick Bourne, and definitely no thank you with Demarcus Robinson. Neither of them are safe with Pearsall back on the team. But I mentioned this game is probably a shootout, so let's fade the Panthers defense against the Niners. I doubt they're worth it. And then the Niners could play well. I could see Carolina really shit the bed, but the Niners defense is just so injured. Odds are it's going to be somewhat similar to the last several games where they gave up a lot of yards and maybe a lot of points. So no thanks with either defense, but my long shot for this game is Brian Robinson Jr. of the Niners. The Panthers matchup is allowing top 3 numbers to running backs in the last 4 games. Their run defense is getting really exploited consistently. So I think B-Rob has played well enough to merit some touches. He does look pretty good, and even though it's a revenge game for McCaffrey, they're not going to give him 100% of the volume. So need a touchdown, it could work out, but he's kind of like at best a light version of Tyler Algier. Until McCaffrey goes down, Robinson cannot be started, but does have upside in DFS. Could score a touchdown in a good matchup. But Jatavion Sanders also gets a top 7 matchup here, so maybe he also contributes, but I haven't seen enough from him. Also, Tommy Tremble also factors in, so no thank you with Jatavion. I will pass on the Panthers tight end. But that is it. That is the last game of the week. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And obviously, if you are wondering where the other games are, that's in part 1. Long ass video needs to be split up into 2 parts. So let's circle back on Saturday. We will give you injury updates and all my rankings by then. Most of these decisions will hold, but perhaps things will change as players get ruled out or might come back to the field. So look out for that. I'll see you next time. If you want more content, check out the channel, answer those polls, and I will see you next time. I'm Adam Riancho. Thanks for watching. Nice and blunt.